This video is about why every nation joined World War II, and I've already done a video on why every nation joined World War I if you're interested. Anyway, let's begin with the Axis and a question. Why did Germany start and join World War II? Well, this video can't be a summary of 1918 to 1939 Germany. Or can it? In 1918, Germany lost World War I, and then in 1919 they signed the Treaty of Versailles. And not a single person in the country was happy about it. But there wasn't much they could do except suck it up and be poor. Until 1923, when everyone in Germany became a millionaire. But a loaf of bread cost 200 million, so being a millionaire didn't quite have the same ring to it. After Germany pulled itself out of this hyperinflation, the Great Depression hit, putting them back to square one. But then in 1933, a man rose up claiming that he would fix all of Germany's issues. And I don't think we can trust this guy, guys. He's an Austrian pretending to be German. What else is he lying about? Well, for a start, he definitely lied about only wanting the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia. And he also definitely lied about the Sudetenland being the last piece of land he wanted. After getting everything it wanted by lying, Germany turned to Poland and told them to give up Danzig. Now, Poland wasn't stupid and had seen Germany pull this trick like 5 times by now, so they weren't going to fall for it. Germany then staged a false flag operation and used this as justification to declare war on Poland, starting World War II, kind of hoping that Britain and France wouldn't join, but by this point they were sick of Germany's shit and declared war on them to defend Poland. Now we have Germany's cheeky sidekick, Italy. Now, 1930s Italy was a lot like you and me, because it also wanted to rebuild the Roman Empire, but unlike me and you, it actually had a crack at it. And this is exactly why they joined World War II. But why did they join in mid-1940 instead of 1939 or 1942? So basically, Italy was the first fascist nation to ever exist. So naturally, it was going to be friends with the fascist nation right next to it. Well, not right next to it yet, but it will be soon. Then in 1939, the two of them pushed for even closer bonds. Japan was also supposed to be involved in this, but they wanted the pact to be targeting the Soviet Union directly, because they were planning to test them soon. But Germany, also looking to test the Soviets, wanted it to be aimed at everyone else they were planning to go to war with. But Japan didn't want this, so they backed out. So we're back to the bros. And the pact basically outlined what either Germany or Italy would do if, hypothetically, they went to war. Wink wink. This included, but was not limited to, aiding the other's military, economic aid, aiding wartime production, and they couldn't make peace without the other one's approval. So why, if Italy was so close to Germany and wanted to restore the Roman Empire, did they not join the war when Germany started it? I mean, both Britain and France were part of the Roman Empire, and that's not even including their empire's territorial holdings. Well, Germany once again lied and threw their ally under the bus. This has been and will continue to be a running theme, because the Pact of Steel said that the war wouldn't start for the next 3 years, and Germany started the war the same year Italy signed the treaty. So Italy wasn't ready. But how did they become ready in 1940? Did they squeeze 3 years worth of wartime production and troop training into 1 year? Or did they rush and enter the war completely unprepared? If you know anything about history, you'll know the answer, and if you're new to history, hi, I'm TODBOO, and Italy sucks! But why did they pick June 10th, 1940 to join the war? Well, because France was 12 days away from surrendering, and Italy assumed that the war would be over right after that, and if they wanted a slice of the French pie, then they would have to get their fingers in it now. Obviously, the war didn't end there, but that's not what we're here to talk about. Now we take a quick flight to the other side of the world to visit Japan. They were already at war before World War II even started, with some people with way too much time on their hands saying that World War II started in 1937 when Japan declared war on China. You'll notice this is not the world, this is just Japan and China. But unlike the other two big Axis players, Japan did not join the war until 1941. But why did they join the Second World War when they were already in the middle of another war in China? Well, having multiple wars going on didn't matter to Japan as long as they thought they could win both. Hence when they tested the Soviets at the Battle of Lake Khasan. Then they realized they couldn't win a war against the Soviets and China at the same time, so they decided not to pursue a war with the Soviets. And in 1941, when Germany declared war on the Soviets and asked Japan for help, they still decided not to pursue a war with the Soviets and even signed a non-aggression pact with them. So why did they declare war on both the Allies and America in 1941? Many reasons. 1, the war in China had become boring and they were advancing at a snail's pace. 2, it looked like Germany had just won the war and they were about to take all of the Allies' colonies, including the vast swathes of land in the Pacific owned by France, the Netherlands, and Great Britain. And 3, in order to finish the war in China, they needed oil, and they would get lots of oil from the Allies' colonies. But why did they go to war with America? Because even if they could take control of the Allies' colonies, they would still be getting most of their oil from America, and America had just embargoed them, meaning that they were no longer selling the oil to them that they so desperately needed, as well as a ton of other important materials like iron and coal. And not only that, but America had just started the Lend-Lease program, supplying Britain, China, and the Soviets with war materials. So although America was technically neutral, it was obvious whose side they were on. And Japan was worried that when they went for the Allies' colonies in the Pacific, America would step in and join the war to defend them. So to stop this from happening, they launched an attack on Pearl Harbor to cripple the American fleet and stop them from being able to join the war, and hopefully stop them from even wanting to join the war. history will tell you that this didn't work. Now let's move on from the forgotten front to the even more forgotten front, the Middle East, where Iraq and Iran also fought for the Axis. In 1941, there was a coup in Iraq, putting Rashid Ali in power, and he was already prime minister twice before, but this time he wasn't asking. He was a fascist, so already leaned towards the Axis cause. But his greatest crime was that he tried to remove British influence from Iraq, and this would not stand, because Iraq was important to the British, because of its proximity to the Suez Canal in India, and the fat stacks of oil in the country, and the fact that it really looked like Iraq was going to join the Axis, with them arresting any politician that was sympathetic to the Allies, as well as shutting down any broadcast or newspaper that was also sympathetic to the Allies. Oh, and they also put an RAF base to siege, ordering that no aircraft or troops move without them giving orders first, followed by the British ignoring this and ordering the Iraqis to leave immediately, which they also ignored, leaving the two of them in a stalemate until the British attacked the Iraqi position, dragging them into World War II for a month until they surrendered. Now we move on to Iran, and they got taken out by the British and Soviets, surrounded on all fronts, even the south where it was water. Or do I have to remind you all just who rules the waves? Anyways, Iraq was taken over in a surprise attack by the Soviets and British, when the British wanted to send supplies to the Soviets, and the Soviets wanted to receive these supplies. But Iran got on well with Germany, so didn't want to compromise that. And they also wanted to stay neutral, so they refused to let the supplies go through. So in August 1941, the Soviets and British launched a surprise attack on Iran, dragging her into World War II for 6 days before they surrendered. And whilst we're on the topic of countries that didn't want to join the war, let's talk about Finland. Ah, Finland. One of the forgotten nations of Europe. I'm serious about that. When was even the last time you thought about Finland? It was right now, wasn't it? When I asked you to think about it. You didn't even think about it when I said its name. Wake up! Focus! Right. Why did Finland join World War II? Just like you never think about Finland, neither did anyone else in Europe, and she probably could have made it through the entire war without ever firing a shot. But one nation that didn't forget was the Soviet Union, because they're mostly in Asia, and everyone knows that Asians are constantly thinking about Finland. And if you ever looked at a map, you'll realize that this is a lot bigger than this. And if you ever looked at numbers, you'll realize that this is a lot bigger than this. And if you look at this guy, you'll know that he wants to spread power to the workers, and by workers, I mean one particular worker. Himself. And the spreading of that power took shape in the Winter War. To summarize, the Soviets wanted the Finnish border to be pushed back so that Leningrad would be protected. Now this had happened in Czechoslovakia already, not to defend Leningrad, but for other reasons. And then when the border went back, the Germans decided to just get rid of the border entirely and have all of Czechoslovakia for herself. And this type of trick only works once. I mean, Poland didn't fall for it, and neither would the Finns. Also, it was their land, their military looked like this, and the Soviets looked like this, so they posed like zero threat to the Soviets, and what would they even want Leningrad for? So the Finns said no. The Soviets said, bet, and invaded. However, a third player has emerged. The League of Nations stepped in, telling the Soviets to leave or else. And when they didn't leave, they had to deal with the full wrath of the League of Nations. What did the League do, I hear you think? That's right, I can hear you think. They kicked the Soviets out of the League and just left the Finns to deal with them on their own. And they did extremely well, but not well enough to win. They were never gonna win. They never could win. So the Soviets made them sign a treaty, and in that treaty they lost 11% of their territory. Now this number is pretty close to how much land the Germans lost after World War I. And this loss wasn't even Finland's fault, so you can just imagine how mad the Finns were at the Soviets. So 2 years later, when the Germans invaded the Soviet Union, guess who was licking their chops on the Soviet border, thirsting for revenge? It was the Soviets. Shockingly. Whilst they were badly losing the war against Germany, they sent some bombers to go bomb Finnish cities, forcing Finland into the war. Now we move on to another nation on the Soviet border that had it rough. Romania! Romania had a pretty rough go of things. At the start of the war, they were neutral, leaning towards pro-France and Britain. But then they quickly became only pro-Britain, because France no longer existed. And just like everyone else, they thought Germany was going to win. So Romania turned to being pro-German, but they didn't stop to ask the Germans how they felt about Romania. Because in the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, they had already given Romania to the Soviets. And in 1940, the Soviets took a chunk of Romania, and smelling blood in the water, Hungary and Bulgaria also tried to take chunks of Romania. But Romania said no. The biggest kid on the playground could take their lunch money, but they weren't about to let these small fries take their shoes as well. So the three of them went to Germany and asked them who the shoes belonged to. Italy was also there. And they decided that Romania's shoes belonged to Hungary and Bulgaria. So let's take a step back and look at things. Whose side should Romania be on? We have Britain, who's in no position to help themselves, let alone Romania. We have the Soviets, who just mugged them. And then we have the Axis, who just mugged them as well, but they had a meeting about it first. But there's also a fourth option. What if Romania punched themselves in the face? After the mugging, the Romanian government's popularity fell so far that the military was able to stage a coup. And 2 months after this coup, the new government joined the Axis. And then you know the rest. Germany declared war on the Soviets, and Romania jumped right in there with them. But why did Romania's muggers join the war? Hungary had very good relations with the Axis. Germany and Italy were very good trading partners with her, and Germany kept giving her more and more land, and the government was very similar to the German government. But how and why did this happen? Well, Well, if you missed season 1 of World War, then you won't know that Hungary used to be half of an empire, and that empire was on the losing side of the war and got dicked so hard, losing 72% of its land, which was way worse than Germany, who only lost 13%. They were just way louder about it. So in the same way the German people were mad after the war, the Hungarians were also mad. And then the Great Depression hit, making everything way worse, pushing the people of Hungary to the far right. So then in 1932, a new prime minister was elected, and he was a big fan of that Adolf Hitler guy, and not a big fan of the Treaty of Tarion, trying to get it changed and revised before outright ignoring it in 1938. Germany promised to give Hungary part of her empire back, along with threatening to take away what was left of her empire if they didn't get with the program. And with the territorial and economic expansion provided by Germany, along with similar politics, Hungary joined the Axis and the war in November 1940. But what about Bulgaria? Bulgaria also lost land after World War I, and they wanted it back, but not bad enough to actually join World War II when it started. But they didn't even need to join, since they were just being given land, like that piece they just stole off Romania. Italy then offered Bulgaria even more land if they helped with the invasion of Greece. Bulgaria said no, Italy went in anyway, and it went terribly, so Germany had to step in. But the only way they could step in was by sending troops through Bulgaria and Yugoslavia. Knowing there was no way they could stop the Germans coming through their country, the Bulgarians agreed and let German troops move through their territory, joining the Axis thereafter. For Albania, the war began in 1939 when Italy invaded them. But why? Why did Italy do this? Well, basically, first Hitler annexed Austria, then Czechoslovakia without telling Italy anything about it. So Italy just decided to do its own thing as well. And I'm sure this won't go wrong at any time during the war. But in this instance, Italy doing its own thing meant invading Albania. But first, Italy gave Albania a choice.
That they can be a part of something bigger. Or die.
King Zog chose to not be a part of something bigger, even when Italy tried to bribe him. So Italy invaded. The war lasted 5 days before Italy won, setting up Albania as a new Italian puppet state. And that's every member of the Axis and why they joined the war, except for the Axis powers that came out of Yugoslavia. But we'll talk about that when we get to why Yugoslavia joined the war. But first, let's talk about the big three. And France. Britain and France were the first to be mad at Germany, because in 1933, Germany broke the Treaty of Versailles for the first of many times, when she left the League of Nations. Then again in 1935, when her army exceeded 100,000 men. Then the year later, when she moved troops into the demilitarized Rhineland. All of this bothered France and Britain greatly, but not enough to actually do anything. Because who really cares about what Germany's doing inside of her own border? But in March 1938, Germany changed her borders by annexing Austria. This made Britain and France sit up, and then really sit up in September the same year, because they had a meeting with Germany and Italy over who should own Czechoslovakia. You'll notice Czechoslovakia wasn't invited to this meeting. They all agreed that Czechoslovakia would give up the Sudetenland to Germany and get nothing in return. Germany told Britain and France that this was the last thing they wanted to take in Europe. Then 6 months later, they took the rest of Czechoslovakia. Then a few months later, Germany went to Poland and said, "Give me Danzig or else." Poland chose or else because they had learned that trusting an Austrian pretending to be a German was just about the worst thing you could do. This led to Germany invading Poland on September 1st, 1939. And then on September 3rd, Britain and France were sick of Germany's shit and declared war on her. But what about the British Empire and her dominions? The dominions of the empire were a little bit complicated. They didn't have to join the war, but if somebody hit your dad, you joined the fight too. But what about the rest of the British Empire? Well, Britain told them to hurry up and pack their bags, there's a war on. Keeping in the Anglosphere, we move on to America. And come on, you know why the USA joined World War II. Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. But why did Japan bomb Pearl Harbor? For the same reasons America bombed Iraq. Oil! Basically, no one was happy with the Japanese invasion of China, especially the US. Now, Japan's conquest of China was fueled by American oil. So as the bartender does to a local drunk, America cut them off in 1941. So Japan came to the negotiations table with the USA. Japan wanted the USA to stop the sanctions on them, stop sending aid to China, and allow Japan access to the resources in the Dutch East Indies. In return, America would get nothing. Naturally, this was at complete odds to the US deal, in which Japan would end the war with China, and leave French Indochina as well as China. But by the time the whole note arrived in Japan, Japanese aircraft carriers were already on their way to Hawaii. And now for the last of the big three, the Soviet Union. Despite some pretty good relations with Germany at the start of the war, the Soviets knew an invasion from the Germans would one day come. But to put it off until they were ready, they signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a treaty that not only divided Poland, but also created a non-aggression pact between them and the Germans. The pact was supposed to end in August 1949, so the Soviets, or more accurately Stalin, assumed that the Germans would invade then, and that the Soviets would have plenty of time to prepare. But they didn't. After ignoring all the Allies' intelligence reports telling them that the German invasion was imminent, the Germans invaded 8 years before the non-aggression pact was supposed to end. Now we move on from the biggest Allied nation to one of the smallest, Denmark. Denmark had a pretty good deal in the First World War. They didn't do any of the actual fighting and still got land at the end of it. So they tried to stay neutral in World War II as well, since the amount of losses to land they had in the last war was the best in the entire world. And they wanted to try that again. So in May 1939, they signed a non-aggression pact with Germany. And 11 months later, 7 months into the war, April 1940, Germany invaded Denmark, with the entire operation lasting 6 hours before Denmark surrendered. But the invasion of Denmark was part of a larger operation to invade Norway. Now, Norway was an interesting one, because they could have been dragged into the war on either the Allied or Axis side. At the outbreak of World War II, the Norwegians mobilised their armed forces, but decided to stay neutral. A little too neutral for their own good. Germany was shipping 3 million tons of Swedish iron ore from Norway, so Britain wanted to cut this out. And Germany wanted Norway to launch U-boats and keep the iron ore coming. So now both sides were planning their own invasions of Norway. But the invasion was always a second priority, so no one really cared. That was until the Altmark incident in February 1940. A ship carrying 300 British prisoners of war was travelling to Germany, hugging the Norwegian coast, to avoid the Royal Navy. But because of restrictions on one part of the Norwegian coast, she would have to sail out to sea for a short while. But they didn't want to do this, because the British Navy was out there and they were terrified of them. So they went through the restricted zone, where they were stopped and inspected by a Norwegian ship. But the Germans wouldn't let them have a full search, so they weren't allowed to go through the restricted area. But Norway didn't want to start nothing with Germany, so they let the ship go through anyway. Britain heard about this and heard that there might be prisoners on board that ship, so they sent a small Royal Navy task force to inspect the situation themselves. And when the British ships caught up with them, to their horror, they found the German ships being escorted by the Royal Norwegian Navy. The British managed to force the German ship into an ice sheet and trap the ship, but the Norwegians wouldn't let the British go into the ice sheet. But they went in anyway, took the Altmark and saved the prisoners. Now, both Germany and Britain were pissed at Norway. Britain was mad at Norway because not only had they let the German warship through the restricted waters, carrying British prisoners, but they'd also tried to defend the German ship and stop Britain from saving 300 of our own men. Now, Germany was mad at Norway for a few different reasons. Norway had given Germany everything that she'd wanted, broken their own laws, and put their own men and ships at risk for the Germans. And this still wasn't enough for them. So on the 9th of April 1940, Germany invaded Norway. But what about possibly the biggest victim of the war? Poland. Poland was in a bad spot. 20 years earlier, they'd fought a war with the Soviets, and for the past 6 years, that Hitler guy had been saying Poland belonged to Germany. Tensions were made even worse by the fact that East Prussia was cut off from the rest of Germany by Poland. So after annexing a few nations in Europe and putting the entire continent on edge, Germany turned to Poland in 1938 and told them that they wanted total settlement with them. That settlement being, give us Danzig and sign the Anti-Comintern Pact. Now, for those of you who don't know what the Anti-Comintern Pact is, it's an agreement to stop the spread of communism by making it so if the Soviet nation attacked one of the pact signatories, then all the signatories would declare war on the Soviets. So sort of like NATO if it was evil. But Poland refused both of these. So Germany started to plan a full-scale invasion of Poland. And in a complete switch-up in August, Germany signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with the Soviets, which was an agreement to have a non-aggression pact between the two of them, and an agreement to simultaneously invade Poland. And on September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland, starting World War II. Now for the nation that was on the verge of collapse from its very inception, Yugoslavia. Feeling high after the Romanians, Hungarians, and Bulgarians joined the Axis, Germany then invited Yugoslavia to join as well, and it actually worked! But if you know anything about Yugoslavia, then you'll know that no one in that country has ever agreed with anything anyone else in that country has ever said. And the Serbians especially hated this, so they banded together with the rest of the peoples of Yugoslavia who hated this decision and forced the king to resign. And he was then replaced by a 17-year-old who was convinced not to join the Axis. Upon hearing of this coup, Hitler saw it as a personal insult. So without even waiting to see how things played out, he ordered the invasion of Yugoslavia by Germany and her Axis allies. And then after the fall of Yugoslavia, the Germans came to the Croatians and said, "We have freed you! You must now fight for us!" And they did, joining the war on the Axis side. Now before I forget, here's the little three: Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. Why did they join the war? Well, it's actually for a number of complex reasons. Germany wanted to go around the Maginot Line. Germany wanted to go around the Maginot Line. Germany wanted to go around the Maginot Line. And that's that. And then there were a load of other nations that joined the war in 1945, because only nations who fought in the war could join the UN. But these nations basically saw no fighting, and they only joined the war because they didn't want to be left behind after the war, so they don't really count. Thank you so much for watching this video, guys. I really hope you enjoyed. I plan on making way more history videos, so let me know what you thought of this. Please subscribe, like the video, comment down below how I can improve, or any videos you want to see in the future. Thank you so much for making it this far, and I'll see you next time. Bye, guys.